Point Blank is a crime fiction podcast. It may not be suitable for all listeners. We discuss violence in all its forms. The works we reference may include period slang, which some listeners may find offensive. The hosts also have a tendency to swear.
Episode 56, 5-Round Reviews. Okay, welcome back everybody to Point Blank. Today is going to be a review episode, one that I guess we used to call 5-Round Bursts, but we have way more than 5 things to review for you today, and it's going to be sort of a variety of content, at least for me. Justin, are you ready to share some of the, I hope, wonderful things you've been reading lately?
I've been reading a shitload of stuff, also listening to a shitload of audiobooks. That's how I get my exercise. I go walk around the neighborhood for miles, going around in circles, listening to audiobooks. I've listened to like 14,000 James Bond novels in the past couple months, but I'll be reviewing 0 of them this episode. My focus here is on a lot of the stuff I read in association with Blacktop Wasteland, and then a couple other random pieces. So yeah, I'm ready. I got to get this shit off my chest.
Yeah, that's me too. I kind of don't have a theme for mine this time around. I just went through my shelves and picked up a bunch of stuff that I had been meaning to review for the show, and just didn't fit in other places. So that's what I'm going to work through today. So you're going to get a real collection. I think mine are going to be a little bit off the cuff. And Justin, I think you've prepared some things, but I did want to ask you, are those James Bond novels, that sounds like actually a pretty good audiobook. Was the narration and everything of good quality?
They've been very enjoyable. I think the publisher of those audiobooks is Blackstone. They have the rights, and it's a pretty consistent quality. They get some British guy who, I read them at twice speed, so their voices are always a little higher pitched, but they don't oversell the voices. They're not trying to turn it into a radio play. But the readings are tight, and Ian Fleming's writing is such that it makes for a riveting, enjoyable read, because these novels are so action packed and detail oriented. I think they're great for if you zone out for a minute, you come back, you're not really going to lose track of what's happening.
Yeah, that's one thing I've been thinking about is I don't do a lot of audiobooks, but I do listen to a lot of podcasts. I have been thinking about audiobooks for sort of some of that guilty pleasure reading, because of exactly what you just said. You get the story, you can speed it up if you want, and if you zone out while you're doing something else for a couple minutes, it's really not that big a deal. So yeah, it might be something I'm going to take a look at.
Totally. The formula novels, genre novels, very good for that. You're not likely to find a lot of good classic hardboiled stuff in audiobook, at least in terms of stuff that's easily accessible at the library, where I get all of mine. I listen to Libby, which is an app, which is essentially free audiobooks from your library. But, a lot of it's more mainstream stuff and more contemporary work. You can find something like Blacktop Wasteland on there, but you ain't going to find any David Goodis. So it is limited. Ian Fleming, among others, they're all there.
I'm thinking about it for getting back into it. I've been craving a little bit of sci-fi fantasy stuff, and that seems like a good way to absorb that kind of fiction.
Yeah, especially because all of those books are, 1,300 pages. Jesus.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, Justin, I don't know. Do you want to get us started with a review?
Sure, I'll do that. I have about 7 reviews today. Some of them are long, some of them are incredibly short. So I'm going to start with the long one to get it out of my system. This is Run Man Run by Chester Himes. For the readers out there who have not read this book, this was not on my radar initially. It isn't one of the books by Himes that's been regularly discussed in the pieces I've read. It's not part of the Harlem cycle. This is a standalone novel, and I loved it. I'll just say that right off the bat. Let me give you the scoop, and I'll try not to spoil too much here. Run Man Run by Chester Himes is a brilliant suspense novel that held my attention till the last page. We're talking 200 pages at most, but man, is it packed with action. Here we follow a psychopathic undercover cop named Matt Walker as he hunts down the last witness to the murder of 2 innocent black laborers one drunken night in a Manhattan cafeteria. This takes place in the late 50s or the early 60s. The witness to the murders is a guy named Jimmy. He's an interesting and compelling character. He's a young black man who lives in Harlem, and he has a psychopathic cop after him. We know it all the way through, and it's pretty frightening. We root for him throughout the book. We understand his fears and his anxieties, and we get why he feels that procuring a pistol and taking action is the only way he'll survive. I'm not going to reveal how the ending happens, but obviously this dude is a little bit concerned about himself and his family because of the situation he is in. I also really enjoyed Jimmy's girlfriend, Linda, at least at first. I think Himes dropped the ball in terms of capturing her character or a fully complex woman. She seems to fall for, or at least be persuaded to Matt Walker's side, the cop, and I felt that was a little bit sketchy. It was too easy for her, for somebody who I thought was a critical thinker. I'm just not convinced that she would have been so easily charmed by his conversation with her in the nightclub in the middle of the book. Questionable gender stereotypes aside, the cat and mouse chase that threads throughout this short novel mesmerizes and captivates from page 1 to page 180. The monster is obviously Matt, but he also has a brother-in-law who's a cop who's sort of waffling about whether or not Matt is guilty or not. He thinks he is, but he's sort of not so much interested in justice as much as not really rocking the boat and upsetting the delicate balance of his family. This amorality, I think, is almost as frustrating and shocking to me as straight-up psychopathology, and I think that's another thing that Himes does well in this book. I wanted to give this book 5 stars because it was so surprisingly enjoyable, but that portrayal of Linda disappointed, so I'm going to drop it down to a strong hit. Nonetheless, this is one of the best Himes novels I've read, one I would recommend widely as an exemplary model of suspense fiction, an indictment of individual police power, and a sober window into the world of black lives in Harlem in the racist 1960s era United States. So if you haven't read it, Kurt, it's a quick read, and man, is it good.
That does sound good, Justin, and you're making me want to read some more Chester Himes, who, I think really is probably one of my favorite discoveries from doing this show. Somebody I didn't know about before we started this whole project, and somebody whose work both surprised me and continues to intrigue me. So, all right, for my first one here out of the gate, I'm going to go with what probably could have been considered a forgotten classic candidate when we were doing that. So we'll call this, Is This a Forgotten Classic? And that's the book Satan Takes the Helm by Clements. I read the Black Cat Books version from 2020. It was originally published by Gold Medal Books in 1952. And now this is definitely straight up nautical noir, but what it does well is it blends sort of a somewhat typical noir type story into the nautical space, so you can understand why I was drawn towards this book and why I liked it. Basically, the story here is it's happening during a downturn in shipping. Whether this is supposed to be the 1930s or right after World War II, I'm not exactly sure. I think it's supposed to be the 30s. But anyway, jobs on ships are very hard to get. So we enter our sort of main character, Martin Landowski, who worked his way up. He has a license. He is a chief mate looking for a captain's job, guy looking for a berth on a ship. And he can't really find anything. He gets a tip that a boat called the Eastern Trader is looking for a chief mate. And he responds to this sort of mysterious ad. Enter Joyce Sloan, who we find out is married to the captain of this vessel, Captain Sloan. Now, in typical noir fashion, Captain Sloan is a quite older man who has married Joyce, who's much younger, out of some sort of contrived convenience. I'm not quite sure why she decided to marry him, but she does. Anyway, so Joyce gets Martin to join the ship and then proceeds to plot with him to try to take control of the Eastern Trader. And then, so we have this marital noir plot at sea. And I think it executes that somewhat trope storyline pretty well. So I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5. Downsides, I would say, is some of it is predictable. However, there are some twists in the narrative that does differentiate it a little bit from this type of noir story. And there is some incidences of period racism in the book. And I don't think it's like over the top, but it's definitely there. So that's that. Satan Takes the Helm, and I would qualify this as a forgotten classic.
Cool. I like the title. It's enticing.
Yeah, it is. And the cover is kind of, typical. You got the shirtless man leaning back and the lady in her, not really short shorts, but I'm sure they were short shorts for the time, looking at the disheveled mariner with some degree of passion, you might think.
Yes. The long forgotten art of hard-boiled novel artistry.
Yes, at a time when men who were barrel-chested and wore their pants up to their belly buttons was considered attractive.
Yeah, well, it's bound to come around again.
That's right.
There's still hope for you, Kurt.
That's what I'm banking on.
Yeah.
All right, Justin, would you got another one for us?
Sure. Well, I have 7 or so, but how about another one by Chester Himes? Get this one out of the way.
Oh, all right.
I finally got down and sat down and read Plan B, which is the last of 9 books in his Harlem cycle, which features our 2 badass Black Harlem cops, Coffin Ed and Gravedigger Jones. So I wanted to see what all the hoopla was about this non-finished novel. Given that Himes didn't actually finish it, he died before it was wrapped up. I'm not going to critique it as a finished work of art, but I did want to mention a couple of things because this is a damn intense book. Totally not what I expected. Even though I knew some of what to expect, this is not a book that feels finished. It's not a book that has the same rhythm or beats that the rest of the cycle has. So one thing I'll say very clearly, any waffling or appeasement by Chester Himes to see both sides or to try to understand the psychology of policing, that's gone. In terms of racial and economic justice, he's very clearly chosen a side. And this is a revolutionary book written by a guy who's no longer concealing his disgust for policing and white supremacy in the United States. So you see the full cycle of him from his earlier books, questioning the system, questioning structures of power. At this point, he's no longer questioning. He's made his decision. And that decision plays out pretty clearly in this book. I'm not going to tell you what happens because, for one, it's a really fucking weird book. Essentially, Revolutionary War has come to Harlem. And that's all you need to know about that. If you have not finished the Harlem series and want to know what happens to Coffin Ed and Gravedigger Jones, how do these black police officers deal with this black revolutionary sentiment in Harlem? How do they get involved? Do they become enemies of the people? Do they get into conflict with each other? Well, this book will reveal that to some extent, but there's not as much of them as you would expect from the last book in a series where they are the featured character. So essentially what I'm going to suggest to you is don't expect the expected, just prepare yourself for a weird ride that ends surprisingly and is very viscerally revolutionary in its spirit. I would give it a hit, not because I thought it was a brilliant book, but because it was a fucking ballsy book, and we'll never know fully what Himes intended with it. So, but man, it's a shocker. So
I'm interested in that one, Justin. I remember you said you had picked it up, and I picked it up a copy as well, because it's not that easy to find.
No, I had to dig around. I actually found a open culture library book I could check out, and then I literally screenshot each page and read it that way.
Oh wow!
So yeah, I did the cheap version, but yeah, it's rare. You can spend a lot of money trying to obtain a copy.
I did get a hold of a relatively affordable physical copy, but I had to dig around to find that one. I need to finish, I think, 1 or 2 more books in the series before I finish the completed works, and then I'll read that one, because I don't want to read them out of order. The way you discussed it is basically kind of how everybody discusses it, sort of as this mystery, enigma kind of thing that you have to experience. You know, they don't want to really give up a whole lot about the book because you kind of need to experience it for yourself, I guess.
Yeah, it really is like that, and I'll admit that I didn't read every book in the cycle. I read the first 3, And then I wanted to skip to the end to see this one. I'm going to read the rest eventually. Apparently, they're all becoming harder to find. Something, I think, in the waves of Black Lives Matter protest and action, Himes might have gotten a resurgence of interest because a lot of those books that they sell, like they had the Cycle series where you can buy the first 3 books as one, and then the second 3 and the third 3. Those things are shooting up in price, and they're very hard to find suddenly, and I don't recall that being the fact 2 years ago. So, but I look forward to you reading this, Kurt. I'm curious to see what you think. It's an easy book to spoil, and that's why I was so vague about it.
Fair enough. I would guess we're going to see, if that's the kind of popularity we're seeing, we'll see a reprint of Chester Himes soon. I'm sure he's due for one, and definitely worth new exposure.
Oh, absolutely. I think the time is now.
And I think, as we've seen with, S.A. Cosby and Attica Locke, you're seeing a lot of emerging authors who have referenced him as an influence. So that's always a good sign to say, that, well, first of all, he's being remembered, but also that, hey, it's worth giving us a new printing of this so more people can experience the work.
Totally. He's no longer a forgotten legend. He's becoming a fully embodied influence on an entire new generation of radical, or at least very thoughtful, black crime authors. So it's an exciting time, and I hope he gets the credit that he clearly has earned.
Oh, Justin, I won't tell you the price, but I wanted to I was going to share this with you, but I might as well share it with the listeners. I was just in a rare book shop in the last week, which has been nice because this is one of the first bookshops I've been in since the pandemic really hit. And they had a first edition of Devil in the Blue Dress signed by Walter Mosley. And it was not cheap, but I was very tempted to pick that up as a little, I don't know. I was seriously thinking about it for a few minutes, but I did pass on it.
I think you're a little bit more of a collector than me. I think you're a little bit more seduced by those baubles of rarity. I love coming across those rare, signed, old, obscure reads, though. I like to see it. I like to flip through a couple pages if the owner will let me. I don't want to buy it, but what are we talking in terms of price? Are we talking a couple hundred, or how much is a book that was published in 1994 going for?
I mean, this was in mint condition.
Sure.
I'll say that it was more than 300, but less than 1,000. How about that?
Okay, so yeah, that's quite a price.
And I'm not really that big of a collector. I do appreciate certain rarity. For me, it's a lot of times, I mean, like a lot of collectors, like it's the connection to the individual. You know that if this was signed by Walter Mosley, that he held this book in his hand.
Yeah.
And he's sort of like in that category of a person where, like that, I would appreciate that over time.
Yeah.
But it wasn't quite enough drive for me to justify the price that they were asking for this particular book.
Sure. So what do you have for us next?
So we go from collecting Walter Mosley and talking about Chester Himes to a book about a sort of washed up punk rock photographer. And this is Generation Loss. It's written by Elizabeth Hand. This came out, originally in 2007. I read the 2020 printing from Small Beer Press, and this was a winner of the Shirley Jackson Award. Our main character is named Cass Neary. She had a brief moment of fame in the early 80s as a photographer of the punk scene in the late 70s, early 80s, New York City, CBGB Club and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And I think there is a little bit of connection here to perhaps the author's own history, but I didn't really look into that. What I liked about this is that, there's a lot of female characters who are like this young punk woman, but we don't usually see that character as someone who's going into essentially middle age, And I appreciated that. She's still got kind of a fuck you attitude to society, and she's been living like that for quite some time. She works at a bookstore in New York City. She does a little bit of very little photography work anymore, still has some connections from the old days, and what that ends up getting her a job. She needs to get out of town, and she's asked by a publisher friend of hers to go up to Maine and try to get an interview with this reclusive woman who was involved in the early days of art photography. We're talking like 50s, 60s era. So sort of for lack of anything better to do, Cass heads up, big city girl, heads up to small town, middle of nowhere, Maine, and tries to interview this reclusive woman. Well, sort of in the tradition of maybe almost Nordic noir, we start to uncover a long tradition of people from this area who have gone missing, and presumably they just like walked out into the woods and died or went away from and just never came back. Well, there might be a little bit more to it than that. So we get a pretty nice tale of, that isolated family mystery, a little bit of, is there a cult here or is there not a cult here kind of feeling. It's a very slow burn to what ultimately becomes a pretty satisfying conclusion. But the theme of photography and art is involved throughout the entire story. And I just enjoyed this tale. I'm looking forward to the other books in the series. There is a series here. This one has been reprinted, like I said, in 2020, so it's the easiest to get a hold of. The other ones are a little bit harder to track down, but one of them ends up with Cass being in Iceland and getting involved in like Nordic black metal for some reason. I don't know the specifics, but it was just all I liked the combination of art, photography, music, all blending into this almost more of a tense, slow burn thriller than it is like an actual detective story or anything like that. But I would call this a hit. I'd say, 3.75 or 3.5 out of 5. Just from what I've been reading, I think the other books in the series are probably a little bit stronger. So I'm looking forward to spending a little bit more time with Cass.
I have another one that explores policing and racism and the historical U.S. This is called Darktown by Thomas Mullen. It came out a few years back. And I very much enjoyed this historical fiction examination of race and power. It's set in pre-civil rights Atlanta, and there are well-drawn characters, a very tight plot, and plenty of twists and complications, which is, expected in the genre. It's really nice to see systemic white supremacy in the interrogation spotlight, which is rare in crime fiction even now, as a white cop whistleblows racist behavior amongst his people in the department and risks his career to help his black cop comrades, Boggs and Smith, reform the department toward racial justice. Now, these black cops are part of a brand new subset of the police department where African Americans are allowed to serve prior to this moment. Because we're talking, we're still in Jim Crow Atlanta. This is not acceptable. And they are widely ridiculed and ignored for their role as cops. They're not considered legitimate police officers amongst the racist, white, hegemonic elite in the Atlanta PD. Of course, it's great to see a white cop whistleblow and stand up for racial justice. I'm not of the belief that the solution to racism in policing is to hire a more diverse police force. I think policing should be scrutinized on a systemic level more deeply. But I did appreciate how unflinching Thomas Mullen captures racism in the police ranks. He does not shy away from the brutality, and he does not shy away from the very visceral racism. If you're somebody who's triggered by racist talk or by racist actions, this book, I'd be wary, I'd be careful with this book because it does not pull any punches. Ultimately, do think that more crime fiction should aspire to challenge policing as a violent system. And I think that more books should try to emulate what Mullen tries to do here. I consider it a definite hit. And while maybe some of it gets a little bit formulaic at times, I think he actually has another one in this series, if not 3. I'm not 100% on that, but I look forward to reading the next one and seeing where he takes this story. So I'd give it a hit. That's Darktown by Thomas Mullen.
Well, that's interesting. I had heard about that one. I was curious, Justin, if you wanted to speak briefly about why you read these books on a very similar theme.
Yeah, I guess I'm sort of pigeonholing myself here. I did a talk a couple months ago for the American Pop Culture Association on policing and crime fiction. I read a variety of books. Obviously, some of the books that I'm sharing with you today exploring how these authors have interrogated the system of policing in their crime fiction and trying to understand historically how that's evolved, but also questioning the extent to which crime writers are culpable in perpetuating systems of injustice. I think that it's important not only to provide entertainments and to share writing that's an homage to genres we appreciate, but it's also important for us, I think, to stand on the right side of history. And as I see the right side of history, that's always standing for the underdog. It's standing for the oppressed. And I think it's time that the systems of policing and criminal justice get scrutinized deeply and systemically, and that radical solutions be discussed in the context of crime fiction. And I want to tip my hat to anybody who's willing to take that risk, because it is a true risk. It's a risk because publishers don't want to publish stuff that challenges readers. They want to publish stuff that makes money. And a lot of readers, including a lot of Point Blank readers, I'm sure don't agree with this view. A lot of them are cops or believe in the system of policing as ultimately good or righteous, whereas I think, and many others also think, that these systems are not righteous and will never be righteous, and they need to be dismantled and replaced with something that is truly progressive and community built. So it was a fun conversation I had at the conference. I think a lot of times submitting a conference idea or a proposal is really just an excuse to be forced to have to read a bunch of books I wanted to read anyways. So it was great to sit down with a big stack of books and go, hey, my work's making me do this. It was really great. And a couple more of the books I'm going to share with you later in this episode are also products of that conversation I had.
Yeah, well, that's interesting because, first of all, that's an extremely interesting topic. And it's also great to see how fiction, well, really of any genre, can be relevant in current society. And you've just connected the dots there very well. But I was definitely chuckling at the committing to something that ends up with you getting a pile of books that you wanted to read anyway. And perhaps I'll allude to why my collection of a certain type of book has been building at the end of the episode.
Yeah, I think both of us deliberately or unconsciously make decisions that force us to have to buy more books in our lives. So
we do that deliberately, Justin.
Okay, no unconsciousness about it.
No, we need to be real.
Okay, good point.
Next up for me is a book. Boy, I've been holding on to this one for a long time. I originally picked this up when we were going to be doing a more general South American crime fiction, and we ended up focusing in on Brazil. But this book is The Shadow of What We Were by Louis, probably going to butcher this, Sepulveda. This came out, the edition I have is the 2010 Europa edition, which was translated into English. The book came out in 2009 and won the Primavera Award in Spanish literature. This is a short novel, and it's kind of one of those that is kind of crime fiction, it's kind of not. This touches on the legacy of a fascist leader, of Pinochet in Chile. And this takes place in the latter, or what would have been the latter days of the Pinochet regime. And we have a group of old or older Chilean radicals, some socialists, some anarchists, some communists, who are gathering in a warehouse to meet their old leader. These were, this is 20, 30 years into the Pinochet regime. And these guys were active back when Allende was leader in Chile. And they've been summoned by sort of mysterious means by their old leader, who goes by the nickname The Shadow, to pull one last action against the Pinochet regime. And as they're meeting in this warehouse, they get a report that the Shadow has been killed en route to the warehouse. So then the real debate becomes, do we carry on? What do we do? And to a degree, how do we carry the legacy of what we used to stand for? And do we still stand for that? So ultimately, it is a discussion of whether or not they're going to commit a crime against the Pinochet regime. This is more of a meditative type crime novel, but one that I really enjoyed. For me, it's probably, as I was reading it, it probably fit into it was probably a 5 out of 5. It's probably fallen off, but if I reread it, I'd probably go, yeah, this was great. This author, Sepulveda, is somebody I would love to read more of his work. I believe, unless things have changed greatly in the last year or two, not a lot of it has been translated yet. So I would love to, I'd love to see that. That's the Shadow of What We Were.
Wow, that sounds terrific.
Like I said, I think you would. I'm sure you would enjoy it. So
Cool.
You should check it out.
Awesome. I'm going to dive into a quick 3 for 3. These are very short reviews.
Ooh.
I'm just going to knock them out.
Okay.
Rather than overwrite, I just wanted to get a quick impression here. So here's one listeners might appreciate. Remember when we reviewed Richard Stark, whose character Parker we didn't love as much as some of our readers? I said it was a great book. I really liked The Hunter. Kurt didn't love it. Well, here I am with the second in the Hunter series, The Man with the Getaway Face. And let me say this. This book was fucking great. Okay? So there. I like Richard Stark a lot. This is a great book. So get off our backs. Better than The Hunter, I think. Kurt, I think you might like it. There's lean prose, crisp dialogue, all that classic Westlake, just dive in, but with more focus than some of his standalone novels. I think he took a little more time with these. There's a lot of detailed description as this crew prepares for the robbery of an armored truck in rural New Jersey. This is a book about planning. This is a book about the slow build of working up to a crime heist and then perpetuating the heist. Then there's Parker, cool, collected, forever focused on the job, just locked in. And I couldn't put this down. This is just wonderful. Just a great read. There's no socio-political commentary in this book. It's just a fucking book about a caper, and you watch it unfold, and then you watch the trouble that ensues. But highly recommended.
Yeah, I that sounds good, Justin, because I think just recently I got another we got another comment on I think YouTube about it. It's like I knew I was going to take flack on that my opinion of the Parker novel, but you have to acknowledge that I didn't really have a lot of exposure to the author or the character, so I was looking at one novel.
Yeah.
And I get it. Once you've had the chance to read multiple books or the author, I mean, we've talked about the issue of a first novel of an author and in the series, there's limits to that. I get it. And I also get that this character, has a lot of other stories. And once you've read, a couple of those, I can see how that affects that first book, your view of the first book. But I was just looking at one book, and that's my opinion from that book. So I am fully prepared to move ahead in the series and try something else, because I do realize that so many people like it, and there's got to be a reason for that.
Yeah, and this one is better. I think The Hunter is an imperfect book. This one is great, and I think it loses some of the problems I had with The Hunter. So check that out if you get a chance, Kurt, and the readers who haven't dived into Richard Stark's work yet. My second 3 for 3 is by James Baldwin, If Beale Street Could Talk. Is this a straight-up crime fiction novel? Not quite, not by genre standards, but it's a love story come crime novel about the consequences of systemic oppression on two black families in New York City in the 1960s. Crime is at the center of this novel. It's about a guy who's in prison. He wants to get out of prison. His girlfriend's pregnant. It's about how if you do one thing wrong, even if it's barely a thing or you didn't even do it, it could ruin your life and it could destroy the life of not just your family, but multiple families. It's a powerful first-person narrative from the perspective of a young black woman in New York City who's experiencing this stuff firsthand. It's very romantic. It's very beautiful. It's also sad, and it's also infuriating, and you're watching injustice unfold, and you know how it's going to unfold, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. So a quick read, a powerful read. Baldwin's brilliant. Not exactly a crime novel, but it deals with the stuff of crime and the stuff that make crime novels interesting to me. So highly recommended that one. One more before I pass the torch back to Kurt. Speaking of Walter Mosley, Kurt, have you read Always Outnumbered, Always Outgunned by Mosley?
No, I haven't. It's one of those on my to-be-read list.
Yeah, it put it up on the top in terms of Mosley because, we reviewed Blue Dress, his first novel featuring Rollins quite a few episodes back. This has nothing to do with that series. This is a one-off collection of short stories. It's not even technically crime fiction. He sort of takes a break from crime fiction to tell the story of ex-felon Socrates Fortlow. He's a man who's fresh out of prison. He's in prison for shit he did. He raped and he murdered. So this isn't some, I'm innocent, I stole some Cheetos and I got set up. This guy did what he went to prison for. He knows it. He learned some lessons. Still, he's a black man and is a product of the criminal justice system, which means that he's marked for life. And you can't serve time and pay the price for your crime and find peace and harmony. You will always have that mark on you. And this is a story about him, 14 intertwined stories, about him not only reckoning with his actions and being the man he wants to be, but also just trying to get by. Like, how do you get a job as a felon in Rodney King era LA? He tries to get a job at a grocery store. They don't trust, he's a felon. Are they going to give him a job? Well, does he have to lie in order to get the job? How does he relate to young kids he sees going down the same path as him? He's a streetwise, cop-wary dude who's mindful of the dangers and temptations facing young black men and women in the city. He's grown up and he knows kids who have grown up with little hope and little opportunity. We're seeing this play out through his eyes, a wise man who's lived a life and lived hard, and we're seeing how he interacts with the community as he tries to keep out of trouble. I think it's not flawless, but it's a beautiful collection. It's the best thing I've read by Walter Mosley. And if you want a break from straight up genre fiction, but still with the themes that Mosley's really good at writing about, man, this is a fucking great book. So always outnumbered, always outgunned. If I were to rate it on a 5 scale, I'd give it a 5.
Wow, that sounds good, Justin. I think you're right. I might have to move that up my list. All right, next up for me, I'm returning to a series. Well, I didn't know it was a series at the time, but next up is Champagne Cowboys by Leo Banks. This is the sequel.
You find books with good titles. I don't know where you dig them up.
Well, this is the sequel to Double Wide. It came out from Brash Books, I think, right at the end of 2019. And, I was even looking for this book because I knew Leo Banks had something else coming out. But I don't know. I missed it. I didn't see a whole lot about it. This is the second book in the Whip Stark series, basically. And you may recall him. He's the washed up baseball pitcher who buys a trailer park out in the desert and sort of injects himself into various investigations of crime along the border in, I think he's outside of Tucson, Arizona. And I think you would like this, Justin, just because of your geographic location. And I think Banks has a nice, I don't want to call them a guilty pleasure book for me, but there's not a ton of substance here. There's not a ton of, of commentary necessarily, but they're just an entertaining read. And I think Banks does a nice job of characterization, pacing. And in this one, basically, and I can't remember if these murders actually occurred in the first book or not, but 2 friends of Whip Stark were killed during what appeared to be a home robbery. And this happens prior to the book starting. And Stark's girlfriend, who I forget her name, but she's a TV anchor. And she tells him that she has an interview with a guy who might have some information on these murders. Well, they go to conduct this interview. They find this fellow dead. That leads to a burglary home invasion ring led by former veterans of the war in Iraq. There's assassinations, there's double crossing, there's all this just good stuff in the desert that keeps the pace going. There's also a story, and this is why I would highly recommend reading these in order. Stark's father is an English professor who has been convicted of murder, and also a heroin addict who has been convicted of murdering someone. And that's talked about in the first book. In this book, Stark spends a significant part of the time of the book, trying to prove the innocence of his father. And whether or not he succeeds in that, well, I'll leave that to you, the reader. But I really recommend Leo Banks. I think we're going to see a lot from him. I think it's going to be an entertaining series. Check those out.
Those sound terrific. You had me at the word Tucson. It's my not-so-secret favorite magical desert city. I'm intrigued by the name. I'm intrigued by the titles. I'm going to check those out as soon as we're done recording. So thank you for that, Kurt.
No problem.
My last book is actually something I'm going to call a mini-feature called Honorable Mentions, where I review a self-published crime novel recommended by a fan of Point Blank. I'm not going to do this very often, So please don't send me all 12 of your self-published novels. I'm very wary of self-published novels and that whole industry generally. So this is going to be sporadic. But one of our fans, a writer who has been trying their hand at crime fiction, offered their book. I said I'd give it a quick look, and I did. And for the most part, I enjoyed it. The book is by, and this is a pseudonym, M. Ravenel, Ravenel. It's a pseudonym for a writer best known for her work in romance and paranormal romance fiction, not my typical arena. But this book is titled The Arrangement. It's a mostly PG-rated detective fiction story in the vein of Dick Tracy and the crime-fighting detective serials of yesteryear. There's not a lot of violence or sex, or swearing for that matter. I think they say fuck once or twice. We swear far more on this show than there were swears in this book. I would not call this a hard-boiled novel, though it does capture the classic detective fiction vibe in terms of the language and the crime solving. So it's definitely a tribute to the classic crime fiction of the 30s and 40s. In short, there's a boxing match, and the match is fixed, and the boxer, who is supposed to fake losing, decides he doesn't really want to. This sets off a crazy string of complications that may or may not include murder. Our detective is Tootsie Carter, a young black woman who was once a cop. She still has connections to the police force. Apparently their break was amiable. And she's offered this case, as well as apparently other cases, as this is likely to become a series, from her former police chief. So when the cops have a lot of work to do, which appears to be all the time, we're in New York City, they get overburdened. They give Tootsie a call, and she takes on the crime or the case herself. I would say that this book would classify as more of a surface level adventure. There's not much exploration of the socio-politics of crime and policing. There's no meta-narrative about the world we live in. There's no world-weary Raymond Chandler Marlowe type character here. Tootsie is sort of on the up and up, spirited, lively, quick-witted, full of energy, really is into detective fiction and detecting, and definitely reads as a love letter to the golden era of detective fiction. So I would say this isn't a book that I would regularly glom onto. I'm more into the grit. I feel like this is a book that reads gritty, but won't cause your grandmother to have an aneurysm. And I do have some issues. There were some issues with plotting, and I felt like Tootsie Carter was a little bit of a Mary Sue at times. Ultimately, though, this was written by somebody who writes often and well. This is a well-written book, and I look forward to seeing what M. Ravenel does with the series. I would give this an honorable mention as a self-published crime novel, and thank you for sharing it with us, M.
Yeah, Justin, I read that one as well and enjoyed it. You know, I would pretty much echo your review of it. I did enjoy having a black female detective character set in the 70s of New York City. I liked that. I wish that was almost elevated a bit more. But like you said, it sort of reads gritty, but it doesn't actually end up being that gritty. So it kind of in that interesting niche. But I would recommend it, and I'd like to see more. Personally, I'd like to see to hit the grit a little harder. But yeah, enjoyable. Check it out. Support one of our Point Blank community members.
Totally. Do you have any more for us, Kurt?
I do. I have one quick book review, and then I was going to launch into some crime fiction quick TV mentions, and then we can come out of the episode here.
Cool.
My last book review, and this isn't really a crime fiction book, but I think it has enough crossover that our listeners might be interested. This is a book called The Freebooters by Robert Wernick. It was written in 1949, and I read this as an ebook republished recently by Cutting Edge Books. I think there will be a hard copy coming out soon. This is sort of a dark satirical World War II novel. It has a little bit of existentialism in it. It's in the vein of something like Catch-22 or MASH, but it predates both of those things by a fair bit. What we follow here is sort of a ragtag group of behind-the-lines soldiers during World War II in a task force called Task Force Sisyphus, and their job is to find fascist sympathizers behind enemy lines as the front progresses forward. Well, they don't really do a whole lot of that. Mostly, it's sort of about the absurdity of elements of Army life, the corruption of the Army, sort of the the cunning and whatnot. And one of the things I really love about World War II, both novels and memoirs that are written in a very narrow period, and I would say that's like maybe 1947 to the start of the Korean War, is that they have a certain honesty to them that is then sort of washed away by sort of reimagining our history in World War II. And this novel definitely fits into that category. I've read a few things in this time frame, and I really think that's interesting because certainly the American experience of World War II is fascinating, but it is also went through a very large period of where that story was whitewashed and cleaned up to reinvent the actual history that happened. And I think we're just getting out of that period here within the last 5-10 years where we're seeing more real history. So this novel, for its darkness, its almost noir elements, even though it's not exactly a noir novel, is one I would recommend. And that's The Freebooters by Robert Wernick.
Cool. That sounds great.
Justin, you have anything else you want to review, or should I move into my TV reviews?
Go for it, Kurt. Dive right in.
Well, first of all, Justin, I did want to share something. I know we did talk about the film Knives Out on this podcast, and I think we both enjoyed that one, if I remember right.
Oh, yeah. And we actually watched it again last month, and I enjoyed it just as much the second time. It looks like Netflix just bought the rights to the two sequels to that film, so we'll be getting more stories from Benoit.
Yeah, that's what I was going to mention, and that's pretty exciting. So the rest of these are, I sort of went on a little bit of a kick of the true crime documentary, and so these are just a couple quick ones. Operation Odessa, this was on Netflix. I'm not sure that it's still there, but you might be able to find it on another streaming service. This is a crazy story about how some 80s and 90s Florida-based drug dealers attempt to buy a surplus Russian submarine to smuggle drugs from South America into the United States. I will leave it at that, except for the fact that you have the Russian mafia, the Colombian cartel, strip clubs, fast boats. You know, if you want to see the real sort of Miami Vice, this is kind of that documentary. I enjoyed it.
Wow, that sounds great.
Another one that I enjoyed was Tread. And this is a documentary that covers, you may remember this one, Justin. Remember the guy who got pissed at his local government and took a bulldozer and then like armor plated it and drove it around downtown and like smashed up the whole town?
Yeah, that was like around Colorado Springs.
Yeah, it was around. Yeah, so this is the story of that. And he's an interesting character because like he obviously kind of goes off the deep end, right? But in a way, like I can see how people have sort of envisioned him as something of an American hero, because in his mind, the local government kind of screws him over and he goes crazy. But it is an interesting story. And one of those things that you can drag up, like, I kind of remember that story. Well, here's the true story of what happened in that case. Another one that we just finished last night is Murder Among the Mormons. And this one is a 3-part series on Netflix. I really enjoyed this. It's about a guy who deals in Mormon historical documents, rare documents. It's a 3-part series involving the Mormon Church, rare documents, suspicious bombings, and the 1980s. So I don't know what more you need than that, but that was good.
Those are my 4 favorite things.
All right. 2 fictional things, and then I'll be done. One is, if you like Nordic noir, I watched the Valhalla Murders. This is a lot of trigger warnings here for like child abuse and whatnot. This is your typical Nordic noir. Something happened 20 years ago. People are dying now. What happened when they were children? That's the story there. It's decent, although you don't really get a lot of empathy from the main characters, I don't think. But it is, if you like Nordic noir, check out the Valhalla Murders if you haven't already. And then lastly, I had good hopes for a show called The Irregulars, which just came out on Netflix. This was a retelling of Sherlock Holmes, basically from the point of view of the Baker Street Irregulars, the kids that help him out. And this involved the paranormal and some other stuff. And It was entertaining, but just a mishmash. I had better hopes for that one.
Well, I think we covered a lot of ground. Anything else, Kurt?
Well, Justin, I guess it means that it's time for me to make my announcement to our listeners. I mentioned my amassing a new collection of books, and that's because I have decided to go to grad school in the fall of 2021. That has nothing really to do with the show per se. I'm going to be pursuing a degree in marine and environmental affairs, basically marine policy. I'll be taking my 15 plus years in the maritime industry to that degree, and where that's going to go, I'm not exactly sure. I have some ideas, but that's a topic for another time. How is that going to affect the show? I can see some positives and I can see some negatives. The first positive is Justin and I will be on a somewhat more regular schedule because the two of us will have similar schedules. And I'll also be on an academic calendar, which means we can plan things out with some degree of consistency. So I think that is going to help the show as far as our planning, our recording, and our release schedule. I'm not going to commit to anything beyond that, but I do think that's going to help us. The other thing I think that's going to help is that because my life will become more on the computer and engaged, I do hope to be a little bit more engaged with our social media presence and our online community. Maybe not a ton, but at least with a little more regularity than I currently am.
That would be awesome.
Yes.
Congratulations. Obviously, I already knew of this, and I played my role, but congrats on the new journey, and I look forward to seeing how it all shakes out. You finally get to join us suckers who thought grad school was a good idea.
Well, that's true. I mean, I'm not coming into it with rose-colored glasses, but I do think I am in a little bit different position coming in with years of industry experience. Puts me in a little bit different place than, say going to grad school straight out of undergrad.
Very true.
We'll see how it plays out. I don't know. The other thing I'm looking forward to is having access to an academic library. I'm hoping that for the show anyway, maybe I can look at some of those more academic-y articles more easily. The downside, I think, really the biggest downside is, well, realistically, I'm not going to be able to read piles of crime fiction books like I have been. So I'm going to have to narrow down my reviews, focus on our featured topics and subject unknown reads, and keep it to that. So I don't really think for you, the listeners, that's going to have a huge effect, but it may have a little bit of effect. It will mean I am more available to both Justin and you, the listeners. So I'm looking forward to that.
Kurt will be on shore to service your every needs.
That's right. Justin, what do we have coming up next time?
So episode 57 is our next episode, and we're going to be revisiting one of our favorite authors that we've read for the Point Blank podcast. That's Dorothy Hughes. Woo! Last time we read In a Lonely Place, which we both gave 5 stars, 5 hits. This time we're going to read The Expendable Man, another book that's widely regarded by her. I'm also going to read Ride the Pink Horse, which is another of her works. We're going to spend some time with an author we really love, so hopefully she stands the test of time with these other works. From there, we're going to dive into a subject unknown. We're going to head over to the Windy City. Windy because of its politicians, not its wind currents. And hang out with Chicago noir. What makes Chicago a good noir city? I grew up in the Chicago area. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about Chicago, but it's deep in my heart and my bones. And it'll be nice to think about Chicago as a place for crime fiction. We have a lot of stuff we're hoping to read. And if you do have ideas for us, feel free to share. But we already have probably 18 books that we could read on the topic. So
yeah,
that should be fun, if not daunting. And then we dive into another deep dive with an author that a lot of you have wanted us to read, Charles Willeford, the old Miami, Florida noir stalwart. We're going to read his novel Miami Blues, which came out in the early 80s, I believe. And it's a good one. So look forward to that. How do they contact us, Kurt?
Well, if you want to get in touch with the show, if you have a specific question, the best thing to do is email us at pointblanknoir@gmail.com. If you want to make a comment, you can go to Facebook. Point Blank, Hardboiled Noir, and Detective Fiction. We have a Facebook group there, and that's probably the best way to interact with other Point Blank listeners. Not a lot of traffic in that group, but enough to keep the discussion going. So check that out. And you can always leave a review on iTunes. That is helpful. We really appreciate it if you go there, and especially if you leave a 5-star review. Yeah, that's how you get in touch with us. And until next time, take care.
Stay safe out there, folks.
Bye-bye.
Point Blank is under a Creative Commons license. Music is by Justin. Copywritten works are property of their respective holders.